The Honourable the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, Amen, Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honourable members, I wish to draw to your attention the presence of the National Youth Parliamentarians 2018 in the Chamber, and I wish to welcome them on our collective behalf. Honourable members, Mr. Esmond Ford MP, member for Tunapuna, has requested leave of absence from sittings of this House from October 31st to November 7th, 2018. Dr. Fuad Khan, MP, member for Barataria San Juan, and Mrs. Glenda Jennings-Smith, MP, member for Toko Sandy Grande, have both requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted. Honourable members, pursuant to Standing Order 89-2, the following members were appointed to serve on the sessional select committees of the House of Representatives for the 4th session, 11th Parliament. Standing Orders Committee, Mrs. Bridget Anisette George, Chairman, Mr. Faris Al-Rawi, Member, Mr. Anthony Garcia, Member, Mrs. Glenda Jennings-Smith, Member, Dr. Fuad Khan, Member, Mrs. Vidya Gayadeen Gopi Singh, Member. The House Committee, Mrs. Camille Robinson Regis, Member, Chairman, Mr. Colm Imbert, Member, Major General Retired Edmund Dillon, Member, Mrs. Ayana Webster Roy, Member, Dr. Rudal Munilal, Member, Mr. David Lee, Member. Committee of Privileges, Mrs. Bridget Anisette George, Chairman, Mrs. Camille Robinson Regis, Member, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, Member, Mr. Stuart Young, Member, Mr. Rudranath Indar Singh, Member, Mr. Barry Padarath, Member. Statutory Instruments Committee, Mrs. Bridget Anisette George, Chairman, Ms. Nicole Oliver, Member, Mr. Stuart Young, Member, Dr. Lovell Francis, Member, Mr. Rudranath Indar Singh, Member, Mr. Roshan Pare, Member. Business Committee, Mrs. Bridget Anisette George, Chairman, Mr. Colm Imbert, Member, Mrs. Camille Robinson Regis, Member, Mrs. Cherian Critchlow Coburn, Member, Mr. Barry Padarath, Member, Mr. David Lee, Member. Honourable members have also received correspondence from the President of the Senate, which is dated October 31st, 2018, which states as follows. Dear Honourable Speaker, Establishment of the Joint Select Committee. I refer to your letter dated October 5th, 2018 on the subject at caption. I wish to advise that at a sitting held on Friday, October 19th, 2018, the Senate concurred with the House on the establishment of the following. 1, a joint select committee to consider and report by December 31st, 2018 on the Constitution Amendment Tobago Self-Government Bill 2018, and the following 6 members were appointed to serve on the committee. 1, Mr. Nigel De Freitas. 2, Mr. Clarence Rambarat. 3, Mr. Foster Cummins. 4, Mr. Saddam Hussein. 5, Mr. Stephen Crease. 6, Dr. Varma Dayal Singh. Second, a joint select committee to consider and report by December 31st, 2018 on the Cybercrime Bill 2017. And the following 6 members were appointed to serve on the committee. 1, Mr. Clarence Rambarat. 2, Mrs. Paula Gopi-Schoon. 3, Mr. Gavin Simonet. 4, Mr. Wade Mark. 5, Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon. 6, Mr. Paul Richards. 3, a joint select committee to consider and report by December 31st, 2018 on the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018 and the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018. And the following 6 members were appointed to serve on the committee. 1, Mr. Clarence Rambarat. 2, Mr. Daniel Duki. 3, Dr. Lester Henry. 4, Mr. Saddam Hussein. 5, Mr. Stephen Crease. 6, Mr. Paul Richards. 4, a joint select committee to consider and report by December 31st, 2018 on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill 2018. And the following 6 members were appointed to serve on the committee. 1, Mr. Franklin Khan. 2, Mr. Robert Lehan. 3, Ms. Alison West. 4, Mr. Wade Mark. 5, Mr. Torrell Shikisoon. And 6, Ms. Jennifer Raful. Additionally, at a sitting held on Monday, October 22nd, 2018, the Senate concurred with the House on the establishment of a joint select committee to consider and report by December 31st, 2018 on the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill 2016. And the following 6 members were appointed to serve on the committee. 1, Ms. Alison West. 2, Mr. Robert Lehan. 3, Mr. Foster Cummins. 4, Mr. Wade Mark. 5, Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon. And 6, Mr. Paul Richards. Accordingly, I respectfully request that the House of Representatives be informed of this decision at the earliest convenience, please. Respectfully, Senator the Honorable Christine Kangaloo, President of the Senate. Honorable members, I am now ready to rule on the matter of privilege raised by the member for Aruka Maloney and Leader of the House. It is well accepted that Parliament is a place of strong opinions and emotions, and when tempers flare, members can get carried away. However, I am consoled that generally our House is more orderly and decorous than many others. On October 10th, 2018, the member for Oropouche East and member for Laventille West engaged in a heated exchange. As I advised on that day, I did not hear the exchange. However, I have since viewed the video footage and listened to the audio recorded during the sit-in. I've also read the Hansard of the proceedings. The words attributed to the member for Oropouche East in the matter raised by the member for Aruka Maloney were in fact uttered. I am also satisfied that several other members heard the comment. Honorable members, the matter raised by the member for Aruka Maloney is a serious one, as there's absolutely no place for violent or threatening language in this House. The statement made, when placed in context as presented by the member Faris Al-Rawi, clearly falls below the esteem and dignity of the Parliament. Therefore, having considered the submission made by the member Faris Al-Rawi, and in accordance with my duty under Standing Order 32-4, I rule that a prima facie case of breach of privilege has been made out, and that the incident requires further consideration by the Committee of Privileges. I so rule.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following papers. 1 to 2, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Racing Authority for the years ended July 31st, 2009 and 2010. 3 to 4, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Public Transport Service Corporation for the years ended September 30th, 2009 and 2010. 5, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the statement of recovery of expenses of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries for the year ended December 31st, 2017. 6, the special report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the audit of compliance with procurement practices for the Shore of Peace Stabilization Project of the Ministry of Works and Transport. 7, the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Solid Waste Management Company Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2016. 8, the audited financial statements of Export-Import Bank of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year ended December 31st, 2017. 9, the audited financial statements of Palo Seco Agricultural Enterprises Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2017. 10, the audited financial statements of Taurus Services Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2016. 11, the annual report and audited financial statements of National Enterprises Limited for the financial year ended March 31st, 2018. 12, the audited financial statements of National Quarries Company Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2012. 13, the policy-based loan agreement between the Corporación Andina de Fomento and the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the amount of US $300 million and executed on July 21st, 2017. 14, the policy-based loan agreement between the Corporación Andina de Fomento and the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the amount of US $180 million and executed on April 23rd, 2018. 15, the policy-based loan agreement between the Corporación Andina de Fomento and the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the amount of US $120 million and executed on August 29th, 2018. I beg to move that papers 1 to 6 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and papers 7 to 12 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 6 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and papers 7 to 12 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 16, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 4th report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure on an inquiry into the Trinidad and Tobago Inter-Island Ferry Service with specific focus on the procurement and maintenance of ferries. Paper number 17, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Health to the 5th report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on an inquiry into the adverse health effect of fireworks. Paper number 18, the response of the Police Complaints Authority to the 9th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality, and Diversity on an inquiry into the treatment of detainees and conditions at holding cells in Trinidad and Tobago police stations. Paper number 19, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Public Utilities to the 15th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Water and Sewerage Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the years 2008 to 2013. Paper number 20, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Public Utilities to the 16th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission for the years 2012 to 2015. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of National Security, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 21, the annual report of the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board for the period October 1st, 2014 to September 30th, 2015. And paper number 30, the annual report of the operations of the Interception of Communications Act, Chapter 1508 for the period January to December 2016. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the administrative report of the National Energy Skills Center for the fiscal year 2014-2015.
The Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 23, the administrative report of the former Ministry of the Arts and Multiculturalism for the period October 1st, 2011 to September 30th, 2012.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 24, the International Labour Organization Protocol of 2014 to the Forced Labour Convention 1930, adopted at the 103rd session of the International Labour Conference of the ILO held in Geneva, Switzerland on June 11, 2014. Paper number 25, the International Labour Organization Recommendation on Supplementary Measures for the Effective Suppression of Forced Labour, number 203, adopted at the 103rd session of the International Labour Conference of the ILO held in Geneva, Switzerland on June 11, 2014. Paper number 26, the International Labour Organization Recommendation concerning the transition from the informal to the formal economy, number 204, adopted at the 104th session of the International Labour Conference of the ILO held in Geneva, Switzerland on June 12, 2015. Paper number 27, the International Labour Organization Recommendation concerning employment and decent work for peace and resilience, number 205, adopted at the 106th session of the International Labour Conference of the ILO held in Geneva, Switzerland on June 16, 2017. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
The member for Labray.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 28, the delegation report on the 15th Parl-America's Plenary Assembly promoting inclusive societies for sustainable development held in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada from September 9 to 12, 2018. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of Planning and Development.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 29, the Draft National Environmental Policy 2018. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
Reports from committees, Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Leader of the Opposition.
To the Honourable Minister of Education, in light of the recent protest at the Clark Rochard Government Primary School, which has over 600 students, could the Minister inform the House when would urgent work commence to address the issue of a lack of power supply to the entire school, as well as poor ventilation?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, records at the Ministry of Education show that the EFCL has already developed the scope of works to commence work on the electrical system. The tendering process is complete. It has been evaluated and a contractor selected. As we speak, Honorable Member for Siparia, a letter of award is being prepared as we speak, and works are to begin in the shortest possible time. On the issue of ventilation, an officer has been assigned to go into the school next week, early next week, to address the issue of ventilation, and it will be addressed with the same urgency and seriousness as we did with the electrical system. Thank you very much.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Works and Transport, could the Minister state what action he proposes to take to assist the family of 6 at St. Cross Road, Barkpore, whose home is in danger of imminent collapse due to a major landslip on the road immediately in front of their home?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Works will conduct piling and shoring up work in the short term until a long-term solution will be undertaken based on the availability of funding.
Supplemental member for Naparima.
Is the Minister aware that the house could collapse at any moment, and the fact, and until the road is repaired, repair works cannot be done to the house because the slippage will continue?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, that is why we are ensuring that immediately this work will be undertaken. Thank you.
Supplemental.
While immediate action is being taken, what is being contemplated for the family in the interim? Because the house could collapse tonight as we speak.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Works and Transport do not deal with relocation of citizens. And I am sure if there's a need for relocation, the Ministry of Housing will undertake to, and Social Services will undertake to investigate that matter. Thank you.
Member for Oropouche West.
Speaker, to the Minister of Works and Transport, with regard to reports that over 150,000 citrus fruits on farms in Kumoto being susceptible to loss because the access bridge to the farms was completely destroyed by the recent floods, could the Minister indicate how soon the damaged bridge will be repaired?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, based on the information received at the Ministry of Works and Transport, the bridge appears to be in the Vega de Oropouche area, in Melau to be more precise. The bridge falls under the purview of the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation. However, the ministry have been in contact with the Sangre Grande Corporation. We are offering technical support and any additional support that they may need. I spoke to the chairman of the corporation, and the corporation is giving close attention to the bridge. Thank you.
Date for the completion.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, this is an old wooden bridge in an agricultural area. Again, the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation are the ones who are handling this. This bridge falls under the purview of the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation. All we are doing is assisting them with technical assistance and if they require any further assistance from the Ministry of Works. Thank you.
On notice, request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Member for Caroni East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 17, I hereby request your leave to move the adjournment of the House at its sitting today for the purpose of discussing the following definite matter of urgent public importance, namely, the unprecedented, widespread, devastating flooding of October 19 to the 21st, 2018, that affected Trinidad and Tobago, and specifically the constituency of Caroni East, which was among the worst hit region by these floods. The matter is definite because it relates to the complete devastation of nearly 2,000 homes, property, possession, and the resulting damage to the mental, physical, and emotional health and well-being of over 10,000 residents. The matter is urgent because of the threats of continuous rainfall, which may bring repeat floods to this area, given its geographical proximity to the Caroni River, the country's widest river, as well as its general flatland location. The matter is of public importance because of the threat of future flooding as we speak, and in the absence of immediate relief in the form of relevant monetary compensation and infrastructure works, the residents may face possible serious consequences if affected once more. I so move.
Honorable members, I am not satisfied that this matter qualifies under this standing order. I advise that the member may pursue this matter under Standing Order 16.
Statements by ministers, personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House agree to the following appointment to the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity. Mr. Rushton Parry in lieu of Mr. Barry Padarath. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that this House agree to the following appointment to the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity. Mr. Rushton Parry in lieu of Mr. Barry Padarath. All in favor say aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Public business, committee business, motions.
Member for Digo Martin, notice.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018. Before us this afternoon, Madam Speaker, is the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018, which is designed to amend the Income Tax Act, Chapter 7501, to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago meets its international obligations under the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes, the FATF 40 recommendations, and the Tax Information Exchange Agreements United States of America, Act Number 4 of 2017, also known as the FATCA Act. When the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018 was first read in Parliament on May 25, 2018, I gave a brief synopsis of the rationale behind the proposed amendments and the context in which the bill was being treated as a matter of priority in the legislative agenda of this government. Today, I propose to give a more detailed and in-depth account of the events leading up to this government's decision to introduce amendments to the existing Income Tax Act, as well as subsequent events that have shaped the approach taken since the bill's first reading. The proposed amendments to the Act, or the proposed amendments to the bill, we have a few amendments here which would have been circulated to members. Just 3, I believe, and they are clean-up in nature. I will speak more about that in due course. This is all part of the process of ensuring that Trinidad and Tobago becomes compliant with the international standard on exchange of information on request, commonly referred to as the EOIR standard, as indicated by the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes. The standard provides for the exchange on request of foreseeably relevant information for the administration or enforcement of the domestic tax laws of a requesting party. The intention is that by adopting this standard, which would facilitate the effective exchange of information for tax purposes, party states can mitigate against the ever-increasing risk of tax avoidance and tax evasion, which threatens government revenues all over the world and every year. Under this framework, it is more likely that corporations and individuals will be unable to successfully hide their assets from tax authorities. In order to ensure that contracting states are compliant, the Global Forum conducts in-depth monitoring and peer review of the implementation of the international standards of transparency and the exchange of information for tax purposes, the standard I referred to previously. All members of the Global Forum, as well as jurisdictions identified by the Global Forum as relevant, are reviewed. This peer review is conducted in a two-phased process. The Phase 1 review assesses the quality of the jurisdiction's legal and regulatory framework for the exchange of tax information, and the Phase 2 review addresses the practical implementation of that framework. Madam Speaker, on October 4th, 2011, under the previous government, Trinidad and Tobago became a member of the Global Forum. Prior to obtaining membership, this country underwent a Phase 1 review in light of Trinidad and Tobago being identified by the Global Forum as a jurisdiction relevant in view of the proposed establishment of the International Financial Center. The report generated by the Global Forum as a result of that Phase 1 review in 2011, prior to 2011, identified several deficiencies in Trinidad and Tobago's legal and regulatory framework system that hindered this country from effectively exchanging information in accordance with international standards. However, no progress was made during the 2011 to 2015 period to address the shortcomings identified in 2011 that would enable this country to progress to Phase 2 of the peer review process. The resulting effect is that Trinidad and Tobago, now a member of the Global Forum since 2011, was given an overall rating of non-compliant at the 9th plenary meeting of the Global Forum in November 2016. In fact, Madam Speaker, I recall one of the first things I had to do as I came in and was appointed Minister of Finance was to request an extension of the deadline for compliance with the Global Forum. If I had not done so, we would have been deemed to be non-compliant in October 2015. So short was the time available to us. In order to receive a positive rating, the Global Forum required Trinidad and Tobago to take the necessary steps to bring the country into compliance with current standards and implement the new Global Forum standards by June 2017. Given this very short time frame, this couldn't be achieved. After much hard work, this government, through the laying of 3 pieces of legislation and their enactment, the first of which is the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018 that is now before us.
In the chamber with a device that is disruptive. Could they kindly leave and return after they've silenced it? Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This government proposes to correct the legislative and regulatory deficiencies identified by the Global Forum through 3 pieces of legislation, which were sent to a joint select committee in the last session, one of which is now before the House. This is the most important piece of legislation from our information. On the last occasion that I addressed the House on this bill, the Income Tax Amendment Bill, I indicated that Trinidad and Tobago was expected to undergo its second peer review in June 2018. That review was in fact initiated as indicated. Part of the review process includes the completion of an EOIR peer review questionnaire, which was submitted on August the 3rd, 2018, to peer countries of Trinidad and Tobago for comments and questions. Trinidad and Tobago responded to these comments and questions in mid-October 2018. Madam Speaker, this questionnaire and its accompanying responses would now form the basis of which an on-site visit would be conducted by the Global Forum. This visit is expected to take place no later than January 2019. The ideal for this country, or the ideal situation, in order to avoid further findings by the Global Forum and possible sanctions, is to have in place enacted legislation that can be reviewed by the assessors when they visit in January. On completion of the visit, the assessors are expected to prepare a report for circulation to and consideration of each member of the peer review group. A full report with comments and objections is to be prepared for consideration at the peer review group meeting expected to occur in May 2019. At that meeting, Trinidad and Tobago will be called upon to account in respect of any inadequacies that we may not have addressed since the 2011 Phase 1 review. The reason why I've gone into some detail to explain the process is to indicate, Madam Speaker, to members opposite and to the national community the seriousness of the passage of this bill before this House. Trinidad and Tobago will be required to appear before the assessors and the peer review group, who are representatives of other countries forming the Global Forum, to explain why this country has not put systems in place to become compliant, if that is in fact the case by May 2019. There will be consequences for inaction by Trinidad and Tobago. I have said in this place on more than one occasion on the phenomenon of de-risking, which is real and potentially dangerous to Trinidad and Tobago's financial sector if this country does not put its house in order. The passage of this bill is one essential step required to put this country on the right path. And de-risking, Madam Speaker, put simply, is the refusal of correspondent banks in other parts of the world to deal with banks in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, when a transaction is required that requires a wire transfer either to, out of, or into Trinidad and Tobago, it invariably requires a correspondent bank. By way of example, the correspondent bank for First Citizens Bank is Wells Fargo in the United States, Madam Speaker. So that, would you please be quiet? So that in order to facilitate a wire transfer of funds, Madam Speaker, from Trinidad and Tobago to, say, California, one would have to pass through Wells Fargo in the United States in order for that bank to continue the transfer to the destination. With respect to the Financial Action Task Force, because this bill deals not only with our Global Forum commitments, but also with our FATF commitments. The amendments to the Income Tax Act also address our obligations under the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations, commonly referred to as FATF. As you know, Madam Speaker, FATF deals with the global international standards on combating money laundering and the financing of terrorism. During the fourth round of the mutual evaluation process, in which Trinidad and Tobago's compliance with the FATF 40 recommendations and the level of effectiveness of this country's anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism system was analyzed, a number of deficiencies were identified as it pertains to our legislative framework. These deficiencies specifically included the restriction placed by Section 4 of the Income Tax Act, as there is no effective provision for income tax officials to exchange information with their foreign counterparts in relation to money laundering, terrorist financing, predicate offenses, and the tracing and the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime. The mutual evaluation report coming out of the mutual evaluation process identified that Section 4 of the Income Tax Act led to deficiencies, particularly impacting on the ability of our Financial Intelligence Unit to perform its core functions, as well as deficiencies in the Proceeds of Crime Act, Chapter 1127. These deficiencies can be addressed and resolved through amendments to the Income Tax Act that we are about today. With respect to the bill itself, Madam Speaker, I now propose to take you through the amendments, which are relatively short, the amendments to the Income Tax Act. Clause 1 of the bill is the short title, provides the name of the act. Clause 2 provides that the act shall have effect even though it is inconsistent with Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution. And this is why we will require the support of members opposite to enact this very important piece of legislation. Clause 3 is the interpretation clause, which provides that reference to the term the act means the Income Tax Act, Chapter 7501. Clause 4 proposes to amend the long title of the act by inserting after the word thereof the words "and to provide for the sharing of information with certain government entities and under certain international sharing arrangements." Reason for this amendment is that the existing wording of the long title fails to recognize the expanded scope of the Income Tax Act, which through this bill will now allow for the sharing of information in its possession with entities, notably the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, once certain specific criteria have been met. As you're aware, Madam Speaker, these are standard preliminary sections in most legislative instruments. The substantive clauses of the bill follow from Clause 5. Clause 5 deals with amendments to Section 4 of the Income Tax Act. It amends subsection 4.2a of the Act and proposes to insert 5 new subsections after subsection 4.3 of the Act, more particularly subsections 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Madam Speaker, Section 4 of the Income Tax Act, which is often referred to as the official secrecy provision, prohibits the Board of Inland Revenue from disclosing taxpayer information, and in fact mandates that such information be treated as secret and confidential. As a result, Section 4 of the Act makes it an offense to disclose such information, except in circumstances where the President authorizes such disclosure, and the disclosure is for the purposes of the Income Tax Act or any other written law administered by the Board of Inland Revenue. The problem with this provision, Madam Speaker, is that it is incompatible with not only the exchange of information for tax purposes, but also with the ability of law enforcement agencies, namely the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and statutory agencies such as the Financial Intelligence Unit, whose remit requires disclosure of taxpayer information to perform their functions under the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act. Should this be left unresolved, Madam Speaker, this country's ability to comply with the global international standards on combating money laundering and the financing of terrorism, as well as the Global Forum standards, will be adversely and seriously negatively impacted. The amendments, therefore, Madam Speaker, seek to address these challenges by creating exceptions to the official secrecy rule. Let me first deal with the proposed amendment to subsection 4.2 of the Income Tax Act. Clause 5A1 seeks to delete subsection 4.2a, which is the provision which requires the President to authorize the sharing of information. This is a very cumbersome process, Madam Speaker, almost impossible to put into action, and it was flagged by the Global Forum as being contrary to this country's obligations under agreements to share tax information. This paragraph is being proposed for deletion to no longer require the President to authorize the sharing of tax information. Clause 5 also introduces exceptions by way of a new subsection 4.4. The proposed subsection 4 seeks to ensure that secrecy provisions do not apply in respect of criminal proceedings, whether on indictment or on summary conviction, that have commenced by way of laying of information or preferring an indictment pursuant to the provisions of the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act. The new subsection 5 creates another exception to section 4.1 and 2. by virtue of the amendment, where there's a written law authorizing the disclosure of taxpayer information to an individual or an entity, the Board of Inland Revenue is required to disclose such information to the entity within a reasonable time. The entity must, however, comply with subsection 6 as it pertains to the information disclosed. Under the proposed subsection 6, the Board of Inland Revenue will now be required to disclose taxpayer information to the Director of the Financial Intelligence Unit solely for the purpose of enabling the FIU to do its analysis under the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act. The board will also now be required to provide taxpayer information to a member of the police service of the rank of superintendent or above, attached to the division or unit of the police service responsible for financial investigations or fraud. In the case of the police service, this information will be provided solely for the purpose of, firstly, investigating whether an offense has been committed under the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act. Secondly, the laying of information, or thirdly, the preferring of an indictment in specified circumstances. The amendment also makes provision for information to be disclosed upon the request of the taxpayer to whom it concerns. The insertion of a new subsection 7 seeks to ensure that any taxpayer information disclosed under Section 4, which reveals an offense under Section 4C of the Act, can be used as evidence in any criminal proceedings. With respect to subsection 8, it is important to note that governments would not engage in information exchange without the assurance that the information provided would only be used for the purposes permitted under the exchange mechanism, and that the confidentiality of such information would be preserved. For that reason, the new subsection 8 seeks to, notwithstanding the exceptions set out in subsection 6, prohibit the disclosure of taxpayer information received pursuant to a tax information sharing agreement for non-taxation purposes. This is, Madam Speaker, of course, unless the jurisdiction supplying the information has laws for and consented to such sharing. Clause 6 of the bill seeks to introduce 4 new sections of the Act, 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D. The new Section 4A proposes to create another exception to Section 4 of the Act, in that it requires the Board of Inland Revenue to provide taxpayer information to a foreign tax administration where that information is foreseeably relevant to the administration and enforcement of the domestic tax laws of another jurisdiction, with which Trinidad and Tobago has an arrangement for double taxation relief or exchange of information in relation to taxes. Madam Speaker, the test of the term foreseeably relevant, as set out in the section, ensures that requests for taxpayer information by foreign tax administrations are not speculative in that they have no nexus to an open inquiry or investigation. In other words, Madam Speaker, that wording, foreseeably relevant, is meant to safeguard against fishing expeditions and to protect taxpayer information against speculative probes. The proposed 4B places restrictions on the use of taxpayer information provided by the Board of Inland Revenue pursuant to Section 4.6 of the Act. The section is meant to ensure that the information provided would only be used for the purposes permitted and that confidentiality is preserved. A similar approach has been adopted by the Data Protection Act in an effort to safeguard information. As a deterrent against non-compliance with Section 4B, which is restrictions on the use of information, Section 4C seeks to introduce offenses for breaches of these restrictions with appropriate penalties for non-compliance. The seriousness of breaching this particular Section 4B, which restricts the use of information for specific purposes, is reflected in the penalties. The penalties involve both a fine and a custodial sentence. Section 4C provides that where there is a breach of Section 4B, in other words, a breach of the use of the information, a person is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $100,000 and imprisonment for 20 years. In the case where a person has been convicted on indictment, the penalty is more severe, a fine of $150,000 and imprisonment for 30 years. That is if information is used for a different purpose for which it was obtained and intended. Section 4D is an interpretation provision, seeks to provide an interpretation to the phrases taxpayer information and statistical information which feature in the bill. Madam Speaker, Section 93 of the Income Tax Act provides for relief from double taxation. The section provides for the declaration by the President of certain arrangements which would provide relief from being taxed in two countries while providing still for charging income arising from sources outside of Trinidad and Tobago to persons not resident in Trinidad and Tobago. The section also provides for determining income to be attributed to such persons and determining income to be attributed to persons resident in Trinidad and Tobago who have special relationships with persons outside the country. The provision did not allow for the sharing of personal information. It is proposed to amend Section 93(1) of the Income Tax Act to make provision for the President in the case of relief from double taxation to make arrangements with the government of any country as specified in an order for the collection, receipt, and sharing of information by the Board of Inland Revenue. With the current global thrust aimed at reducing the occurrence of tax evasion and tax avoidance, the approach has been to make provision for the sharing of information in double taxation agreements. This is the new movement throughout the world, Madam Speaker, that in double taxation agreements, you have provisions for the sharing of tax information, all aimed at dealing with tax evasion and tax avoidance. This amendment therefore seeks to streamline local legislation with current international standards. Clause 7 of the bill proposes to amend 93(1) to make provision for the receipt and sharing of information relative to these agreements I just mentioned. Clause 8 seeks to introduce a new Section 93A to the Income Tax Act to create exceptions to the privacy limitation set out in the Data Protection Act. The proposed 93A exists in similar fashion under our existing legislation, such as the Tax Information Exchange Agreements, United States of America, Chapter 7651 Act. Therefore, the concept is not new. We also are aware, Madam Speaker, that several provisions under the Data Protection Act are incompatible with our efforts to become compliant with our international obligations. We have therefore sought to create, by virtue of the new 93A, exceptions to the provisions in the Data Protection Act, which would prohibit the receiving, use, and sharing of personal information in the possession of the Board of Inland Revenue without the express consent of the person to whom the information belongs. The Data Protection Act also prohibits the disclosure of information outside of Trinidad and Tobago unless the country receiving the information has similar data protection safeguards as Trinidad and Tobago. The challenge we face with that provision is that some of the countries with which we have tax information sharing agreements do not have similar provisions in their legislative framework. For that reason, it is necessary to allow for the sharing of information in circumstances where similar safeguards or similar provisions do not exist in foreign jurisdictions. In order to deter against the abuse of the exceptions provided, the proposed Section 93A also makes it an offense for a person to use or disclose information other than for the purposes for which it was obtained. Let me repeat that. The proposed Section 93A makes it an offense for a person to use or disclose information other than for the purposes for which it was obtained. The seriousness of this offense, again, warrants a fine and a custodial sentence. The section provides that a person who commits such an offense, in other words, using information obtained under this legislation for the wrong purpose, the person is liable on conviction to a fine of $100,000 and imprisonment for a term of 3 years, and conviction on indictment to a fine of $150,000 and imprisonment for a term of 5 years. Clause 9 of the bill proposes to amend Section 1171 of the Income Tax Act by inserting after the words "this act" the words "or any other written law over which the board has oversight." That is just a cleaning up provision. Section 117 of the Act deals with the information gathering powers of the Board of Inland Revenue. It states that the board may obtain information for any purpose related to the administration and enforcement of the Income Tax Act from any person with respect to their income, assessment, or assets, or from any third party with respect to the income, assets, or assessment of a taxpayer. This section, however, does not apply to persons engaged in professional relationships with such persons. We have therefore sought through the proposed amendment to expand the scope of the board's information gathering powers to any other written law over which the board has oversight. Clause 10 proposes to amend Section 117A1 of the Act by deleting all the words after the words "and other" and adding the words "enactments for similar purposes" and double taxation agreements, again a cleaning up section. The existing Section 117A1 restricts the power of the Board of Inland Revenue to gather financial information and to compel a financial institution or any of its officers to appear before it to give evidence for the purpose of the Tax Information Exchange Agreements, United States of America Act. The proposed amendment seeks to expand the applicability of the board's powers to other tax information sharing agreements and double taxation agreements. Madam Speaker, in light of what I have just indicated, it is critical that the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018 be enacted. This bill is the foundation piece of legislation to a number of other pieces of legislation which follow this bill, namely the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018 and the Tax Information Agreements Bill 2018, which shall soon be before this House for consideration. They were there in the last session. The continuing non-enactment of the relevant legislation, including this bill, will not only affect Trinidad and Tobago's progress to becoming compliant with the Global Forum and the FATF 40 recommendations, but it will also severely damage our international reputation. Now, Madam Speaker, I laid in this Parliament, before the end of the last session, the report of the Joint Select Committee to consider and report on the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018, the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018, and the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018. When we started the process of considering these three bills, it soon became clear that the most important bill in all of this was the Income Tax Amendment Bill. Without the amendment that allows the Board of Inland Revenue to share tax information with other tax authorities, the other piece of legislation would have had little effect. The bill itself is a short bill, it's just 10 clauses. So we decided to focus on that bill and get that bill through the system. After the Joint Select Committee had completed its work and the report of the committee was laid, we sent the bill to the Global Forum. And we received comments from the Global Forum, and they have suggested just a few amendments, Madam Speaker, which are before the House. These are the amendments that were circulated to honorable members last night. They are really not substantial amendments. They are clean-up in nature. They have asked us to use the words individual or entity rather than individual. It's just the terminology that is used in the OECD countries. So rather than an individual, they want individual or entity. And I'm being told it was done for FATF and so on. And also, they've asked us to include the words for an exchange of information in relation to taxes when we refer to an agreement. Again, that's a cleaning up provision. It is not a substantive provision. It's just stylistic as far as we are concerned. And the third one, again, deals with the question of whether it's an entity or what they call a legal arrangement. In our jurisdiction, we use the word entity. In theirs, they use entity or legal arrangement. So the Global Forum is clearly quite comfortable with the income tax amendment bill because the only comments they had to make were stylistic in nature and more typographical than anything else. I want to say, Madam Speaker, that there was a minority report. When you look at the minority report submitted by members of the opposition who were members of the Joint Select Committee, the most substantive comment made that I can see is a question regarding judicial oversight. And I'm sure that is something that we can discuss as we go along. But I want to make the point, Madam Speaker, that if we don't pass this legislation, when the peer review occurs, when the visit comes in January, we will most certainly be deemed to be non-compliant with the Global Forum. We will most certainly, we are already non-compliant, we will most certainly be put on a path that would lead to de-risking of correspondent banking for this country, most certainly. And if correspondent banks decide not to do business with Trinidad and Tobago, that is going to create havoc in our financial system. I therefore urge honorable members to understand the seriousness of what we are about. This should have been settled in 2011. It was the former administration that applied to and asked for Trinidad and Tobago to become a member of the Global Forum. You did that. And having made us a member of the Global Forum, you then put us on the radar and put us under the microscope. And having made us a member of the Global Forum, there are certain minimum requirements in order to be compliant with that organization. And I want to repeat, Madam Speaker, that for one reason or another, between 2011, when the former administration made us members of the Global Forum, and 2015, when they demitted office, nothing was done to achieve compliance with the Global Forum. Nothing was done. So we now find ourselves playing catch-up in a very, very difficult situation. If we do not pass this income tax amendment bill, it will be disastrous for Trinidad and Tobago. As I said, I have looked at the minority report. I don't think there's anything in there that cannot be dealt with by this Parliament. I therefore beg to move, Madam Speaker, that this House adopt the report. I beg to move.
Honorable members, I will now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018. Member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank you for the privilege today to reply to the Minister of Finance in this most important debate, the amendment to the Income Tax Act 2018, which may seem simple and straightforward, but which in our view has far-reaching consequences for every citizen in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. It is my hope, Madam Speaker, that at the end of my contribution, good sense will prevail and the government will act right, proper, and in a responsible manner and send this bill together with the two other bills that were sent to the Joint Select Committee right back to that committee to complete its work. As has been instructed and approved by resolution of this Parliament. Madam Speaker, before I get into the material aspects of my contribution, I wish to thank the Leader of the Opposition for the guidance that she has given to each and every member of the opposition in preparing for this debate today. This bill is one that has been presented by the government as requiring a constitutional majority. And the reason for that is because it infringes on substantial and fundamental rights and freedoms that are guaranteed in the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. When this type of legislation is brought to the Parliament and the opposition's support is required, we must be careful, Madam Speaker, that we discharge our responsibility in accordance with the oath that all of us have taken as members of Parliament to pass laws that are in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, the opposition of which I am a part has demonstrated time and again that we are prepared to support good legislation. We are prepared to work with the government to pass legislation that strikes the right balance between the citizen and the state. What this opposition, led by our esteemed political leader, Mrs. Bisesa, is not prepared to do is to support legislation that infringes the rights and freedoms and privileges of our citizens, and also which can be deemed to be draconian and arbitrary in a manner that offends our citizens. Madam Speaker, when FACTA legislation was brought to this Parliament, our opposition, led by Mrs. Bisesa, supported, in fact, asked for amendments to ensure that that legislation was supported. Madam Speaker, you'll recall that there were approximately 100 additional amendments. And eventually, despite the fact that alarm bells were sounding, saying that if we did not pass FACTA, that the sky will fall, the economy will crash, and the country, because of the amendments that we assisted in preparing, we supported the government and it was passed. The point I'm making, Madam Speaker, is that the opposition, led by our leader, is prepared to support good legislation in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, the same can be said for the anti-gang legislation. When it was brought to this Parliament, we work with the government. We are part of a special committee that worked to get that legislation right. The leader of the opposition, Madam Speaker, took the unprecedented step of inviting the government to bring that legislation back to the Parliament before the parliamentary session ended. The records are there, Hansard is there to show. But Madam Speaker, as we have been just cautioned and warned, up to today, despite the fact that the anti-gang legislation has been passed 6 months after, although the government said that they knew every gang member, not one arrest has taken place. Madam Speaker, and then I want to make reference to the anti-terrorism legislation, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I take a personal interest in this, being a member of the Islamic faith, that piece of legislation was a piece of legislation that was directly in the minds of the members of the Muslim community directed at them. It was a piece of legislation of which I had great and grave concern, Madam Speaker, because there were provisions in that legislation which would have affected the freedom of worship and the freedom of our citizens, albeit even those who are in the faith and those who would have aspired to be in that faith. Madam Speaker, I want to indicate to us the examples are there, and we saw an example very live around Carnival earlier this year. Madam Speaker, what we want to make sure, again, looking at this legislation, this bill today, is that we must be convinced that not only are things being, or these things are being targeted at people, but they must be safeguarding the interests, the rights, the privileges, and the property of all citizens. Madam Speaker, I want to make it clear that us on this side, and we have been guided by our political leader, will support, again, good legislation. But in its current form, as has been presented in that report, we did not and will not support it. Hence the reason why our 3 members have included in that report and attached it a minority report, which I'm going to read into. I'm going to read into that. But Madam Speaker, for those who are here and those who are listening, I want to pose the question, how did we get here? We have heard just now about a blame game going back to 2011. But let me answer that one time. Minister Hawaii, who was the Minister of Finance in 2014, indicated that he met with the Global Forum Group and he got approval for an extension of 2 years to 2017. And my question is, I'm going to come back to that question, and I don't want to make reference to anybody on the other side, but there's a member on the other side, a member from Tobago, and it was in the front page of a newspaper, who, when we raise matters, says, we are in charge now, deal with it. And I am asking the question, you are in charge for the last 3 years, why did you not deal with this? Madam Speaker, I want to tell you that when you are pointing your finger at someone, you must look at yourself in the mirror to see whether you are also responsible and culpable. I did indicate, Madam Speaker, that on the 28th, May the 28th, listen to this, we are indicating, I am on record as saying that Minister Hawaii raised this matter in 2014. The government changed on September the 7th, 2015. We are only just a few months ago been presented in this house here with a statement on the 28th of May, 2018, referring these 3 bills to a joint select committee by the Honorable Minister of Finance. And then, you know what happened, Madam Speaker? Having laid that document in here and appointed the joint select committee and referred these 3 bills, when was the first meeting after May the 28th? The 6th of June. When were the other 2 meetings? The 21st of August and the 28th of August. And I'll talk a little bit about those meetings. Madam Speaker, what was the reason? What is the reason for this legislation before us?
Madam Speaker, I would like to listen to the honourable member, please.
So, members, I appreciate it's a long time we have met in debate, so members might be a little anxious to make their contributions, but all will be recognized in due course. So if we can hear Member for Shogona Seas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wanted to indicate this is really also an education for all of us. Because many people who are listening, you're hearing about Global Forum, they're hearing about EU, they may not know what it means. Because these are exogenous institutions to Trinidad and Tobago, determining what we do in this country. And I'll do that just now. Madam Speaker, I was asking the question, how did we get here? And what's the reason for that? And the reason is that Trinidad and Tobago was given an overall rating of non-compliant with the international standards on exchange of information at the 9th plenary, which the Honourable Minister just made reference to, at the Global Forum. When? In 2016. So that nothing was done from September. Honourable Minister indicated to us today, he's on record as saying that within 1 month time he contacted the Global Forum. So what were you doing for the last 3 years after you contacted them? Why are you jeopardizing the economy and the people of this country? I raised those matters. And therefore, what does this mean? He indicated, what does this mean? We are simply not compliant in terms of the sharing of information. That's what this means. Simply, and that is what I'm quoting here as well, with tax authorities in other countries and other jurisdictions. Madam Speaker, I indicated to you that I think we should be all aware as to what this Global Forum is. We are hearing it a lot of times. This Global Forum was created in the year 2000 in the context of the OECD. And what is that? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. To do what? To address the risks to tax compliance posed by non-cooperative jurisdictions. Madam Speaker, our former Minister of Finance, Larry Hawaii, never said that we were not interested and we were not cooperating in terms of tax compliance matters. Hence the reason why he asked for an extension. Because had we been in government and continued, we would not have been here discussing this in 2018. In 2017, we gave a commitment that this was going to be, as a matter of fact, there would have been exchanges taking place because all the criteria would have been met. There was absolutely no reason and no need to bring any new legislation like what we're doing here today. And I'll indicate in a while the concerns by many people in terms of this legislation. Madam Speaker, this Global Forum has 154 members. And it's the premier international body for ensuring the implementation of the international agreed standard of transparency. And the EU, I will speak about the EU. The EU is also, and I'm sorry that some of our colleagues would have left, the young parliamentarians, because they would be able to learn a little bit as to what is happening, particularly on something that is important today. The EU, the European Union, is a political and economic union of certain European states, and it is instructive to know that in 2016, the United Kingdom opted to be out of the EU. I just mentioned that. And Madam Speaker, the question is, what do we need to do? What do we need to do in the context of the report that has been presented to us? In other words, what is required for us to be compliant? Trinidad and Tobago is required to have in place the legislative framework and the administrative structure to facilitate this exchange. How is that going to happen? That's the other question we have to ask ourselves. And that is, we are being told that is going to happen by the passage of these 3 bills to the Parliament. And this one particularly today, that will pave the way for the other 2 to come. Madam Speaker, the government wants us to believe that the provisions that are contained in this bill are required as part of our international obligations to the Global Forum. Nothing is further from the truth. Nothing. And I want to make reference, with your permission, Madam Speaker, of a document that is dated November 21st, 2017, from the Minister of Finance, addressed to Ms. Fabrizia Lapecorella, Chair of the Code of Conduct Group, Business Taxation, Brussels, Belgium. And what this letter is indicating, and it is signed by the Honourable Minister of Finance, it proposes the timelines. I'll do that in summary. For the passage of bills outlined as follows. The Income Tax Amendment Bill 2017, proposed passage date, June 30th, 2018. Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2017, proposed date of completion, November 30th, 2018. Double Taxation Agreement Bill 2017, June 30th, 2018. All of those we have passed. What is the consequence of all of these timelines not being met as promised by the Minister of Finance? What are the consequences? And therefore, Madam Speaker, I wish to indicate that these timelines show, again, it shows, and it is very evident when we sat in the committee, what has happened. It is either that someone forgot, they disregarded, they did not see this as a priority in 2015, or, Madam Speaker, all of the above, ABC. And therefore, in that context, the government wants us to believe that the provisions of these, contained in this bill, as required, will be a sine qua non, without which there will be significant financial consequences for Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, I now want to get to the point of asking the question, are we properly here? Why are we here today? Madam Speaker, when this bill was first read in this House by the Minister of Finance, referred this bill, plus the other 2 bills, of which he made reference to the Joint Select Committee. The mandate of that committee, Madam Speaker, was to deliberate on those bills. It never said anywhere that you are deliberating only on one bill. It said that you are to deliberate on all of these 3 bills and to report back to this House. Madam Speaker, that mandate is confirmed at page 8 of the verbatim of the committee's deliberations of the 6th of June. Madam Speaker, I know that you will remember that date because that was the date that you came in. And you said that you were present to facilitate the selection of a chairman. But the other parts, when you would have left, as I indicated on that, the deliberations on the 6th of June, there was a question that was asked. It was asked by a member for Port of Spain South, Member MacDonald, who asked the chairman, and I quote, And I'm gonna indicate it here now. Member McDonald said, would we be doing, we would be doing which one? Question. Or are we going to take all? Mr. Chairman, we have to do all three. The chairman is indicating in response to Ms. McDonald's question, member for Port of Spain South, we have to do all three in the committee stage. The chairman, member for Digomata Northeast. All three bills have been referred to this committee. Again, member for Port of Spain South is asking, together? The chairman responds, they are all interrelated. Madam Speaker, and that is the point that we are making, that when the mandate of the committee was given to it, it was to deliberate on all three bills. And I just want to also indicate that when you look at the verbatim notes of the three meetings that took place, at the top, the heading, all of them will identify the three bills in terms of the verbatim. It never said, even though it may have been agreed to, with one to be looked at and to be discussed to some extent, at no time did the verbatim note in its heading said one. At all material times, it was understood that we would have been deliberating on all three bills. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I ask the question, if it is that we had to deliberate on all three, why could we not have completed all three and then bring the report to this House? And the question I asked before is, are we properly here? Madam Speaker, I want to get to another point in terms of, I indicated earlier on, that the passage of a bill like this infringes the constitutional right of persons. And therefore, this bill is seen as being important in the context of the need for consultation. And the point I want to make here, at no time did we hear, either before or during, that there was consultation taking place with members of the national community. It is the government's responsibility to consult, especially in a bill as critically important as this. It is important, Madam Speaker, that our Constitution is evolutionary and not revolutionary. We have to ensure at all material times that all the matters that are important to the rights and freedoms and privileges are important, so much so that consultation takes place. And I indicated that. Whether it is with the Bankers Association, whether it is with the universities, whether it is with the insurance companies, whether it is with the credit unions, at no time did we have any evidence of any consultation taking place that would have informed the passage or the laying of this report here today. Or even the BIR, or even any other institution that we would have seen. Madam Speaker, I just want to indicate as well that apart from the fact that there was no consultation in this, in the previous bills that I made reference to, anti-terrorism and FACTA, consultations would have taken place, particularly in the context of the 3/5 majority. And the question I am asking here today, why was there no consultation with important stakeholders in the country? Madam Speaker, this legislation, if passed, engages the Financial Intelligence Unit, the banking sector, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and the judiciary directly. And again, we make the reference to the fact that there has been no consultation, and we want to underscore that. As a matter of fact as well, when we look at the connection of this with the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Bill, you would find that there's an implication, as I indicated before, in terms of those persons of the Muslim faith. Madam Speaker, can this government, sometimes we ask, be serious about placing the power to access a citizen's private financial information into the hands of an officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Police? Sorry.
So that I may have an opportunity to address, could you please indicate where and what in the Proceeds of Crime Act associates with the members of the Muslim community? I'd very much like to get that clear.
Well, as a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, I could indicate that a little later on, but at this point in time, I am just making reference to the members of the Muslim community. And the honourable member for San Fernando West is very much aware, because he would have had consultations and discussions with many members of the Muslim community. And therefore I ask the question, is it really, are we serious as a matter of fact? People are fearful that information as sensitive as this could get into the wrong hands and could affect people's well-being, even their foreign transaction of businesses or travel. And therefore, that's one of the concerns we have on this side. Madam Speaker, I wouldn't want to say some of the things that we would have found recently. I would have removed or reduced the confidence that members of the community and the citizens of this country have in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Except to say, and I want to make reference to the bill.
Standing orders, the members are disturbing us. I really want to hear. 53, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, the buzz in the chamber is increasing. And again, I remind members who are not speaking with respect to listening in silence and no excessive crosstalk. Please continue, Member for Shogunas.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I make reference in that regard with respect to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, with respect to Section 6B of the bill that indicates, and if I may, Clause B, Section 6, Clause 6B, where it indicates, and I read with your permission, provide the taxpayer information to a member of the police service of the rank of superintendent or above, attached to the division or unit of the police service, responsible for financial investigation or fraud, solely for the purpose of investigating whether an offense has been committed under the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act. Madam Speaker, it goes on again, and I made reference earlier on to the Data Protection Act. And Clause 8, subsection 3 reads, notwithstanding Section 46 of the Data Protection Act, information received by the board under Section 93 shall be disclosed under an agreement. Has there been any agreement or any discussion of agreement? We saw that in terms of the timeline. Even if the individual to whom the information relates does not consent, an agreement here as well in terms of the person who is affected by that information, or who is the person from whom that information relates to, does not consent to the disclosure of his information, or the jurisdiction does not have comparable safeguards as required by the Data Protection Act. And Madam Speaker, that's one of the concerns that we have on this side, that while information may be going out of the country, and again, I think the member for the Gomartin Northeast would have raised that there's a concern that the receiving countries or jurisdictions may not have the same safeguards like us, and therefore exposes our citizens to information that could be used for various purposes. Madam Speaker, I just want to indicate as well, in terms of the importance of this, we have been told, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing about it as well, that we did nothing between 2011 and 2014. But I have a document here, which I'm sure the member for San Fernando West will be very familiar with, a press release. But when? 2 years later, Madam Speaker. And
you know, members, I think this calls for some tolerance. I am not being disturbed. I know that there's talk, but we all talk in the chamber, right? And dependent on our level of sensitivity at the time, we may be disturbed. But I haven't heard any increase in buzz to require my intervention. Member for Shogunas.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I wish to read from a press release entitled for immediate release, the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, dated December the 5th, 2017. 2 years later, and the honourable member, 2017. No, I said 2 years from 2015 at the time. 25th, December the 5th, 2017, which is 2 years hence you would have taken office. And the Honorable Attorney General would have indicated in that on page 2 that the government, and I just would like to read some of these things into the records, the government has made significant strides with respect to Trinidad and Tobago's position regarding the deficiencies outlined in the Phase 1 report by the Global Forum. The government sent high-level representation to the Global Forum 9 plenary meeting in Georgia on November the 2nd to November the 4th, 2016. And I suspect that's the meeting at which the member for the Gomata Northeast was speaking about. Trinidad and Tobago applied on January 24th, 2017, to the Global Forum to become a party to the Multilateral Convention on Mutual Assistance on Tax Matters. I will go on to another point. In order to give effect to the OECD requirements, Trinidad and Tobago prepared and laid the Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, Bill 2017, in the House of Representatives on April the 21st, 2017. And the question and the point I'm trying to make is, if you would have indicated all of that and you would have done all of this work, why did you not bring all these 3 bills together before now? And you know, Madam Speaker, when I look at the legislative agenda for the period 2015 to 2018, I would have seen some pieces of legislation, certainly all of them might be important in terms of the government bringing this legislative agenda. But we could have found a place in there, since this thing is so critical and important, to ensure it was within the context of the last 3 years and we didn't have to wait precedent. And it is instructive to note, we are here in 2018, almost towards the end of the year, facing a local government election in 2019 and a general election in 2020. Is it that the government wants to ensure that this compliance takes place before these 2 elections? I just asked the question. And Madam Speaker, I think it's also important for us to indicate, and I would like to take this opportunity to read into the records another aspect of concern that has been raised. We'd have been told, Madam Speaker, at the meeting that a high-level delegation was going to be assembled from CARICOM to speak to this matter of the income tax amendment with the Global Forum. And we asked the question, and Senator Hussain in particular had asked the question, how is it that we're not seeing anyone from Trinidad and Tobago on this delegation? And the chairman of the committee, member for the Gomata Northeast, said, you know, that's an important point that we're making. I am not aware that a delegation has gone. I'm not aware that anybody from here, from our government, has representation in that delegation. As a matter of fact, I think if you look at the verbatim notes, you will see that the chairman indicated that he will probably consider a minister in the Ministry of Finance who will join that delegation in visiting the Global Forum. Madam Speaker, I make that point because we have seen regularly, and we have not, sorry.
Honourable Member for Shogunas, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wrap up your contribution.
15? Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with your permission, I just want to refer to a statement by the Caribbean community on the EU list of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions. And I think it's important that I make mention of this, to the extent where the Caribbean community strongly objects to the disappointing decision of the European Union to blacklist 4 CARICOM jurisdictions, under the guise that they maintain harmful preferential tax regimes or have failed to comply with international standards for tax transparency and good governance. Madam Speaker, in the interest of time, I would just like to indicate that the CARICOM states in this communique has said that they have worked assiduously over the past several years. Implementation of the expanded scope of the EU's criteria requires domestic legislative and administrative changes that go beyond the timeline set by the EU Code of Conduct. They were not in agreement with the timeline set. And in fact, they indicated that they would like to visit the Global Forum to have personal representation to ensure that this matter is satisfactorily dealt with. A similar communique came from the St. Kitts and Nevis government, which was offended by the fact that they were labeled as tax havens. And, Madam Speaker, would you believe that free zones have been deemed or demarked to be tax havens? And I think in the committee meeting, the Minister of Finance, the member for Digomata Northeast, indicated, and to which we all agree, that free zones are important aspects of the economy in terms of revenue generation and so on. Madam Speaker, I think it's important for me at this stage now, given the time I have, to indicate and to read into the records the minority report of the committee. And I will want to indicate, I think the Honourable Member for Digomata Northeast made reference of one. But I think it's important for me to read it because we would like to indicate to the National Committee and to the government what are the recommendations. And part of before we go to the recommendations, I think to what was said before by the Minister, that we insisted as well on a judicial officer. And I want to read the recommendations. Madam Speaker, the minority report makes reference to three main aspects. The lack of judicial oversight. The committee notes that it can be a potentially dangerous provision, as it can be the subject of abuse. All that is required is that a charge be laid in order for a person's tax information to be provided to members of the police service. The provision of taxpayers' information should be such that it should be managed by the oversight, and this is the point that we are making, by a judicial officer. This will, in fact, prevent any potential abuses of such important information and ensure that a person's constitutional right to privacy is properly protected. We also cited the case of South Africa, and I know my friends on the other side will want to make reference to that. The SARS, the South African Revenue Service. And they make reference to the presence of this judicial officer. The second item that we are concerned about is the items of privacy. The bill impacts several crucial provisions contained in the Data Protection Act, Chapter 2204, namely exemptions from Sections 6, 30, 31, 38, 40, 46, and 93. It continues. The bill requires consultations with stakeholders, such as the financial institutions, and its impact. Further, it is noted that there is no proper definition, and I think this is the point that we unanimously agreed upon to ensure that it is placed here. There was no proper definition or guidelines on the extent of the information that should be shared both domestically and internationally. And finally, the third point, the application of the bill. The committee was informed that the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018 was being enacted to ensure compliance with EU requests and would be applicable only to, inter alia, and I want to stress this point, inter alia, EU citizens resident, earning income, and doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. In addition, it could apply to Trinidad and Tobago residents who earn income from EU jurisdictions. Members of the committee are concerned that, as worded, the bill appears to affect the fundamental rights and freedoms of all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and not those with EU Global Forum financial links. As such, Madam Speaker, we made the following recommendations. Recommendation 1, that the draft final report not be laid in Parliament in its current form, as the members of the committee require more time to deliberate, consult, and make recommendations on the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018. Secondly, that on proclamation of the 4th session of the Parliament, that the committee be reappointed in order to complete its mandates, namely to consider and report on the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018, the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018, and the Tax Information Exchange Agreement Bill 2018. Thirdly, and this is the final recommendation, that in light of the commitment of the members undersigned, and that the undersigned means Senator Saddam Hussein, my colleague MP Rodney Charles from Naparima, and myself, that in light of the commitment of the members undersigned to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago becomes compliant with respect to its obligations to the Global Forum, that we await the completion of the meeting between CARICOM and the EU in order to ensure that the amendments are in line with the conclusions of the discussions of the said meeting. Madam Speaker, I would like to, in concluding, indicate the following. Having carefully studied the proposed legislation and the report of the Joint Select Committee, it is my respectful view that the important points that arise for those members, all of us who wish to consider this report again and to make our contributions here today are as follows. Number one, the opposition has demonstrated that it is prepared to give its support to good legislation that strikes the right balance between the citizens and the state, as I indicated earlier. This has been demonstrated with the anti-gang, the FACTA, the anti-terrorism bill, the trial by judge alone. Secondly, are we properly before the House by this motion? As a matter of fact, that was the question I raised as well. The Joint Select Committee, not having completed its work that it was mandated to when the matter was referred, the question is there power to produce a report that is incomplete and there's still work to be done? Thirdly, the question is, can the House be asked to adopt a report that does not satisfy the mandate that was given by the House? Fourthly, has there been proper stakeholder consultation? I'd raise that matter again. With respect to this piece of legislation, which is intended to infringe and intrude upon the fundamental rights, and I gave a number of stakeholder groups. Fifthly, the inaction of the government has brought us to this position, as they have done absolutely nothing for the past 3 years, as I've shown, and the evidence I've raised in terms of the November 21st, 2017 letter. By the letter that has been disclosed by the Minister of Finance confirms that the substance of this particular piece of legislation is not required for us to be compliant and fulfill the undertakings as that he gave to the European Union on the 12th of November 21st of November 2017. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to indicate again that we on this side, we are concerned about this report. We are concerned about the consequences of this report in terms of what it wants to do. We are concerned in terms of what can happen to citizens whose private information may become public and may be at risk. We have seen the consequences of information in the public domain in terms of crime and criminal activity, even in terms of kidnapping. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I wish to propose the following as I conclude. In order to justify, because the question will be asked, how do you justify this minority report? And the question is that the work on the committee is incomplete. It is, Madam Speaker, incomplete in accordance with the May 28th statement by the Minister of Finance. And when you examine the verbatim notes of the Joint Select Committee, the first meeting of all three bills together. Secondly, Madam Speaker, I am mindful of the fact that the bill may not be able to be returned to the same JSC, but in accordance with our standing order, because it was read a first time, it can only be sent to a select committee of this Honorable House or a new Joint Select Committee for full disclosure, deliberations, and consultation. And Madam Speaker, on behalf of my colleagues, we so recommend.
Member for San Fernando West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to answer the submissions made by my learned colleagues opposite. I will do so in a general fashion by characterizing what the debate is. I'll answer the specifics as to our locus or rationale or reason or legitimacy to be here. And I propose to demonstrate what we're dealing with and how we can prescribe a solution. Madam Speaker, my colleague opposite, and this is in the characterization of argument point, essentially did the standard routine of the UNC, the members of the opposition. First and most important point, praise the leader of the opposition. Second and most important point, say, let's take some more time to do the work. Third and most important point, let's find some reason not to support without being able to pinpoint with precision what that reason actually is. And I'll give you a very good example. The Honourable Member for Chaguanas East said, in characterizing some form of ominous intent or effect in this bill, that this bill would be targeting Muslims. He said that the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act would be targeting Muslims. And because this bill makes reference, forgive me, Madam Speaker, that was entirely Freudian. And because this bill makes reference to the Anti-Terrorism Act and the Proceeds of Crime Act, that somehow Muslims...
Honourable members, you know, certain comments are unparliamentary, and you all don't need me to stand up and say that. Member for Chaguanas.
For San Fernando West, thank you. Yes, my learned colleague, this bill, because it somehow makes reference to the Proceeds of Crime Act and the Anti-Terrorism Act, the statement that my learned colleague offered was that this is targeting Muslims. I intervened, my learned colleague gave way. I said, could you explain to me how the Proceeds of Crime Act targets Muslims? And I was met with nothing short of what one can characterize as bramble. The member knows I wouldn't explain, I'll explain it later, and he never did. Madam Speaker, the Anti-Terrorism Act is the legislation in our country which deals with terrorism. Terrorism is not something which is associated with religion. The Proceeds of Crime Act treats with, in large part in sections 44 and 45 in particular, with money laundering and the proceeds of all crime. For my learned colleague to stand in this chamber and message that we are somehow targeting Muslims, I want to say I expect better than that from my colleague, because I consider that to be an irresponsible statement. Madam Speaker, my learned colleague asked a very important question. Well, he posited an argument that somehow this government is to be caught in a position of not having done anything. My learned colleague says, listen, you took office in October, essentially September of 2015. You got into the saddle in October 2015. And here we stand in November 2018, and he basically says, shame on you, what have you done in 3 years? Madam Speaker, let me put this into context. Number one, as the member for Diego Martin Northeast, the Minister of Finance, put it, we were committed to this law by the result of the Global Forum doing our peer review in 2010 under a UNC government. In 2011, we were committed to join the Global Forum by a UNC government. In 2011, the cabinet led by Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, the member for Siparia, the first person to be praised by the honourable member, so I'll join her in the argument respectfully and relevantly so. It was under the hand of Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bisesa, the member for Siparia, on October 4th, 2011. We are now 2 days away from October, sorry, we are 1 month away from October. We are 7 years away from 2011. So 7 years and 1 month ago, the member for Siparia, presiding over the cabinet, confirmed Cabinet Minute 255 of September 22nd, 2011, confirming us to a course of action for Global Forum. In 2012, we had events proceeding. In 2013, the UNC again engaged the Global Forum. In 2014, July 21st, 2014, the UNC government, under Larry Hawaii as Minister of Finance, went and presented himself with cabinet authority to the Global Forum and fixed a deadline. Now let's break this down into simple terms. By committing that we would be compliant with Global Forum by 2015, the UNC government undertook that we would do the equivalent of factor-type agreements, intergovernmental agreements, as we did with the United States of America. The Global Forum required, and the UNC committed us to negotiate 13 intergovernmental agreements, Madam Speaker. 13. I have said in the public domain already that Global Forum commitment, and I warned when we were doing FATCA, I said Global Forum is FATCA on steroids. And I said so because the negotiation of 13 intergovernmental agreements requires time and space and expertise and engagement. And the UNC sat 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And 3 months extra. 5 full years and 3 months, and did not do a single one of the IGAs that were required to be done. Let's enter into the PNM space as government and analyze the argument put forward by my learned friend that we somehow could have remedied this situation in the space between us taking the reins effectively in October 2015 to the 2 years after when we brought the bill. Well, Madam Speaker, most respectfully, we had to do 13 agreements. We said to the Global Forum, you know what? Let us enter in upon a fast-track arrangement. Let us take a multilateral convention approach. Let us come and treat with this by way of one treaty to capture all of the countries, because under the Global Forum, you have to do like the IGA for FATCA for the United States. You have to spontaneously and on a reciprocal basis exchange tax information. You no longer do it only on request, you do it by way of automatic exchange, which is the common reporting standard. We took that approach. That involved us having to go to the Global Forum, engage the OECD, engage the G20, engage the European Council, speak with the European Parliament. But Madam Speaker, my learned friends opposite say that they support good law. And then my learned friend says, you know what? The Data Protection Act, we're very concerned in this bill that there's not an equivalence of data protection standards. It's a point the opposition is concerned about. Let me deal with that. When we came to the Parliament to deal with the intergovernmental agreement for FATCA for the United States of America, we came with an omnibus bill. You see, the law, the Tax Information Exchange Act, which existed on our books since the Honourable Member for Caroni Central, as a member of an NAR government, was in the saddle and negotiated the first IGA with the United States in the 1980s. Since Caroni Central was there was an umbrella law, and you could bring in the agreements. We need 13 for Global Forum. We had a US, which is 1. You could have brought it in under that umbrella law, the Tax Information Exchange Act. What did my colleagues opposite say? No, no, no. Let us do a single standalone act. We will call it, and in fact they made us, they pressured us, they refused to support FATCA. When we had to adjourn the debate and adjourn debate and adjourn, we couldn't figure out what on earth they were saying, because they had never written to us to say what the issues are. Bramble, filibuster, and complaint is what we got. They came eventually and said, you know what? Let's do a standalone for the United States of America. And that is how Act number 4 of 2017 came about. And that is how FATCA came alive. So, my learned friends, it took us 2 years to get FATCA done. FATCA directly relates to Global Forum because FATCA is 1 out of the 13. We had 13 to do. We entered into fast track, we met with the OECD, we met with Global Forum, we engaged in the BEPS arrangement, the base erosion positions. We had to be on constant visitation visits. We have sat down with technocrats, hard-working technocrats from the Office of the Attorney General, the CPC's department, the AG Secretariat, the Ministry of Finance to negotiate a multilateral approach to cure this. And my learned friend, the member for Caroni East, has the temerity to stand up here today, for Chaguanas East, has the temerity to stand up here today and say, what you do for 3 years? No. What you do for 2 years? And I'm explaining to you, it took us 2 years to get FATCA done because of their intransigence. But Madam Speaker, let me tell you how baseless the arguments presented today are. Frivolous the arguments are. My learned colleague, Chaguanas East, stood up and said that the opposition in this bill has a concern with a lack of equivalent safeguards for the Data Protection Act. Now, this bill obviously traverses Section 4 of the Constitution, the right to private and family life. It traverses several sections of the not fully proclaimed Data Protection Act, in particular Section 6, 30, 31, 38, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 69 of the Data Protection Act. Not all in deep trench, but in the very statement that my learned friend says, that they have deep concerns, the opposition, about this bill, about data equivalency protection. Act number 4 of 2017, this is the FATCA Act, the United States Tax Information Exchange Bill, which became an act. In there and in this legislation, Section 12, here it is, notwithstanding Section 46 of the Data Protection Act, etc., etc., hear this. You can exchange the information, you can do it without consent, even though, and hear this one, the United States of America does not have comparable safeguards as required by the Data Protection Act. So what is my learned friend saying? They have a deep concern on tax information exchange in this law, and we agreed to it in FATCA already?
For U.S. citizens.
And let me get to the point of citizens. As I hear an honourable member opposite, in an opulent sort of way, speak about this. Madam Speaker, it is not the Trinidad and Tobago citizens that are disclosing any information here. Let's make this clear for the umpteenth time. Tax information exchange is intended for citizens who are subject to tax laws in other countries. In the United States, it's the U.S. resident or citizen approach. In Germany, in the United Kingdom, in Singapore, wherever it may be, it is not Trinidad and Tobago citizens en masse that are being affected by this. And my learned colleagues know that, Madam Speaker. But they stand up here today and bawl, Muslims, watch out. Data protection concerns we have concern about. And the fine print says, well, we agreed to that already and we understand that it's an exception to the law. I mean, really, Madam Speaker, I find it hard to take what my learned colleagues say seriously at any point in time. So let's go to the positions of the minority report. The minority report produced by my learned colleagues really fall themselves, the arguments there fall into three categories. The first category in the minority report, which is part of this report which you're debating, says we have three bills. We are dealing with one, and the first point that they make, the first point is, let's wait for CARICOM. CARICOM, one of the reasons in the recommendations by my learned colleagues opposite is that we need to hear what CARICOM is saying. And my learned colleague said, where is Trinidad in that? We want to know what's happening. Madam Speaker, I'm able to report today. CARICOM requested the meeting. was blanked. There is no meeting, there will be no meeting, because there is an unequal bargaining power, and the European Union, G20, OECD has taken the position to Trinidad and Tobago and the whole CARICOM to say, listen, either you comply or you don't. It's what my learned colleague put as an exogenous environmental support factor. Listening to the foreign affairs expertise that NAPRIMA offers at times, or pretends to offer. Madam Speaker, there is no CARICOM meeting and there will be none. And on the exogenous argument, or exogenous if you want to put it, I'm putting it in the broken terms of exo and genus. It is outside the nature of where we are. I'm putting it so people can understand. In the exogenous position, we are treating with the fact that there is a consequence for non-compliance. Because if you don't comply, exactly as you had the risk in FATCA with the United States of America intergovernmental agreement, this is FATCA on steroids. And that we should bargain with FATCA. I remember Carney Central saying that vividly. And where's our sovereignty? Madam Speaker, where was our sovereignty when the United National Congress in 2011 joined the very institution that subjugated our sovereignty? Now they tell us, forget that, take our sovereignty, tell them where to buzz off, but the entity which they committed us to tells us, take it or leave it. That's their first argument. CARICOM, let's wait. The answer to that, there will be no CARICOM. CARICOM was blanked. It's not going to happen. What's the second argument in the minority report? The second argument that came in the minority report is the application of the bill, fundamental rights and freedoms, citizens, etc. And my learned colleague makes this point. He says, tell us this. Why not debate all three? Do we have the ability to consider this report? Because in my learned colleague's submission, the report cannot be brought here for some reason, because we need to wait on all three. Well, first of all, we're here pursuant to the standing orders of the House of Representatives, which allows us to report in the fashion that we have. There is wide facility in Joint Select Committee to decide what you will recommend the House to consider. The House is legitimately being asked to consider the amendments to the Income Tax Act. And let me say why that is not only proper, but why we should and what is imperative about it. The Global Forum has said in pellucid terms, in all of their published reports, be they about Trinidad and Tobago, South Africa, wherever it may be, they have said to us, you cannot enter into the multilateral conventions, the fast-track approach, unless you treat with your secrecy provisions in the Income Tax Act. They say, Madam Speaker, in, for instance, the South African peer review report by Global Forum, in that South African report, and I'll come to that under the judicial watch in a second, they say that secrecy provisions cannot stand up, they must be taken down, and you must have access which is unfettered from a law enforcement perspective and from a financial intelligence unit perspective to treat with this. So, Madam Speaker, when we are treating with this, the reason why we must consider this now is that the amendment to the secrecy provisions in the Income Tax Act in Section 4 that we are seeking to amend today, that is the key that allows us to open up the 13 IGA's intergovernmental agreement equivalents. We will not be permitted to sign the multilateral convention unless we do the amendments. Madam Speaker, that is only for Global Forum. For FATCA to do the exchange of information, there's an equal requirement. And for the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, I want to remind, we are in enhanced follow-up in the CFATF, the Caribbean Action Financial Task Force follow-up. And we are also in the International Review Cooperation Group, the ICRG, in FATF itself. And the Mutual Evaluation Report for Trinidad and Tobago for FATF said that we have to dismantle our secrecy provisions. In the Mutual Evaluation Report for Trinidad and Tobago for FATF, they said specifically, and I will put it onto the record, they said at paragraph 788 at criterion 4019, they said at paragraph 395, paragraph 406, paragraph 407, paragraph 75, paragraph, other paragraphs that precede there in general parameters dealing with recommendations 29 to 32 and immediate outcomes 2 and 9, but 2 in particular, and I'm giving you the paragraph numbers because it's too long to read. They say specifically that Trinidad and Tobago's secrecy provisions in the Income Tax Act are in the way of compliance with the immediate outcome number 2. We have to comply this year, and I've given the timeline when we debated the miscellaneous provisions bill that we debated to treat with amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Act, FIU Act, etc. in the last session. I gave the timeline that we are on track for November of this year. Today is the 2nd of November. The deadline is November 2019 to deal with the secrecy provisions for FATF. So forget Global Forum. You have FATF as well. And Madam Speaker, that treats with my learned friend's argument that we should somehow stop this work, send it back to treat with 2 other bills. But let me explain that. So I'll put it in summary. 1, to sign the multilateral convention, you have to unlock it by making the amendments for the Income Tax Act.
Exactly.
2, FATF timetable, and this is published. It was in the members' hands. It's in public statements that I have made as Attorney General with responsibility. We have November 2018 as the deadline to meet the FATF dismantling of the secrecy provision. Number 3,
they know that.
The other 2 bills that my learned colleagues want us to wait and waste time on, one of them alone is 134 pages long. And we have here a simple bill with 10 clauses, including long title, short title, interpretation, 3 of them out, so it's 7 substantive clauses. And my learned friend said, let's talk some more. Let's go back to committee. Let's be concerned about Muslims. Because they say that this bill attacks Muslims, that the Proceeds of Crime Act attacks Muslims. And in the entire period, on the 4 occasions when the UNC amended the POCA, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Anti-Terrorism Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit Act, the word Muslim never came out their mouth. Not once did they express concern in what they now call draconian. On the occasions when they amended it in the 5 years, no concern. And a PNM opposition then, now government, responsible to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, you think we'd be as irresponsible as saying that this is to attack Muslims? That's an argument from my friends by themselves alone. So, Madam Speaker, that is just balderdash. It makes no sense. It is nonsensical. It is vapid. It is vacant. It is just putting up an argument to delay and make more time wasted. It's cheap politics.
Oh yes, oh yes. And dangerous politics too.
Madam Speaker, and I'm reminded by the Honorable Prime Minister, it is dangerous politics. Dangerous. Madam Speaker, I want to report. I was absent for a short while out of Trinidad. I had to find myself at the Cabinet's instruction at the ICRG table in FATF in Paris to defend Trinidad and Tobago's track record, to make sure we didn't slide in the ICRG group, to make sure that our timetable was on track. And one of the matters which we reported to the joint group was that this bill would be coming to Parliament in November. And my learned friends opposite to a man and to an honorable woman as they are know that. And had we not passed the Anti-Terrorism Act, despite the behavior of my learned friends opposite, where they disagreed with their own Joint Select Committee's unanimous report, we would have been in desperate trouble. So, Madam Speaker, there's a need to treat with this. Madam Speaker, when we get down now to what is inside of this, there's a point that my learned friends opposite raise. There's a point that my learned friends opposite raise in the minority report, which they have not, of course, raised on the floor, because on the floor they're not able to raise the argument clearly. The minority report, as my learned colleague, the Minister of Finance, the member for Diego Martin Norte said, raises the issue of judicial scrutiny. So let's break down the bill in simple terms. We are proposing to amend Section 4. We are proposing to amend Section 93. We're proposing to amend Section 117. We're proposing to amend Section 117A of the Income Tax Act. Let's break that down in simple terms further. Section 4 of the Income Tax Act, subsections 1 and 2 are the secrecy provisions. You shall not disclose information. You, the members of the Board of Inland Revenue, must subscribe an oath before a magistrate, an oath of secrecy, and you can't reveal information. Now, every other jurisdiction around the world treats with their circumstances on secrecy in different ways. For instance, the different ways include where there are no barriers to secrecy. Barbados, Jamaica, United Kingdom, South Africa, I'll call 4 jurisdictions, New Zealand, are taking a global approach. All of them allow the financial intelligence unit bodies to have unfettered access to tax information. All Commonwealth countries. And I'm going to focus on South Africa in particular because my learned friends seek to find some solace in the South African experience. Singapore. Secondly, the situation with respect to the FIU stands separate to be considered separately because FIUs are of different types. Essentially, you either have a law enforcement FIU, meaning they could have intelligence and prosecute, or you have on the other extreme an administrative type FIU where you can just report and you have to pass it to the police to take action as we have here. Or you have a sort of a hybrid in between. After the 4th round mutual evaluation reports from FATF on jurisdictions, everybody has had to dismantle secrecy provisions. My learned friends have come forward in the minority report and brought out the South African experience. Number one, for heaven's sake, try to at least compare apples with apples, mangoes with mangoes. South Africa has not had its 4th round mutual evaluation for FATF yet. We have. We have received our FATF 4th round mutual evaluation, and our 4th round mutual evaluation in the paragraphs I just read out tell us in black and white, you have to remove your secrecy provisions. Secondly, the South African law specifically allows the FIU to have unfettered access to the information, and that is to be found in their legislation, which I have a copy of, if I can just pull it up here. The South African legislation specifically says to us, in fact, Madam Speaker, it's at the back of the minority report. The South African legislation says that we are, listen to this, it's at page 4 of the annex onto the report. I believe it's at the report, because after the report, we have annexed a review of the income tax legislation of South Africa. First point, South Africa has not done the 4th round mutual evaluation. Second point, the South African Financial Intelligence Unit can receive information. That's at section 67 of the South African Act. It's the Tax Administration Act of 2011 in South Africa. Very importantly, my learned friends in their minority report point out to section 71 of the South African Act. And in that section it says, look, you need judicial permission for the police to go in. But a clean jump over section 69. Section 69, which is headed Secrecy of Taxpayer Information and General Disclosure, and this is the South African 2011 Act that they are relying upon, says in subsection 2, subsection 1, which is the secrecy 1, does not prohibit the disclosure of taxpayer information by a person who is current or former.
Member for San Fernando West, your original speaking time is now spent. You have 15 more minutes to wind up.
They say subsection 1, the secrecy provision doesn't apply. And here who it doesn't apply to. It does not apply in the course of performance of duties under a tax act, including to the South African police or the National Prosecuting Authority. It says where the information is for witness in civil or criminal proceedings. It says the taxpayer information is necessary, or the taxpayer information is necessary to enable a person to provide such information. And then it says, under any other act which expressly provides for the disclosure of information, despite provisions in this chapter. And then it says again, by the order of a high court, or if the information is in the public domain. Now, Benyon on statutory interpretation, umpteen cases from the Privy Council come down, from the 18th century come up, tell us that the word or, the disjunctive there, is very different from the and. So my position is secrecy of taxpayer information and general disclosure is to be found with an exception under the taxpayer legislation, the income tax equivalents that we're treating of in South Africa. One, the FIU has access, unfettered. Two, there's a general provision, and a court order is one of them. Now, it is true to say that disclosure in criminal, public safety, or environmental matters require judicial supervision, meaning you must have an authorization by way of order of the court. But my learned friends opposite have not condescended to any form of prescription for that. The honourable member for Diego Martin Northeast has said already that that is a point which we are willing to consider. But instead of buying time, brambling, messaging, all hail Siparia, all hail the UNC, we will pass good law, don't mind, we don't know what we're saying, and we're inconsistent about whether we agree or not. The honourable members opposite cannot yet stand up and say to us, cannot circulate a draft to say, look, you know what, section 4(6) of the Act, the Income Tax Act, let's put in a judicial authorization. You want the TTPS to have the information? Well, let a judge say so. And that's not something that we can't consider, Madam Speaker. Does that require us to return to a joint select committee? No. Does that require us to go to a special select committee? No. You see, Madam Speaker, it's a very simple prescription that can be applied. But if my honourable friends opposite want to even say it, I mean, for heaven's sake, Madam Speaker, they got to do a little homework, you know. Because, Madam Speaker, I want to put on the record again, it is the opposition, the UNC, the Kamla Prasad-Bisesa-led opposition, because they take instructions from the honourable leader, that refused to sit in the recess that we had where the standing orders provide that we could sit and do joint select work. They abandoned the work in joint select committee. And Madam Speaker, the honourable members had an opportunity to sit down. They had an opportunity to prescribe. They had May, June, July, August, September, October. They had 6 months to tell us, listen, let's amend section 4(6) as prescribed and put in a judicial authorization. You mean in 6 months they can't write 6 lines? So, Madam Speaker, let me tell you perhaps what causes me the greatest concern. We have said that this government is on a follow the money campaign. Madam Speaker, we have addressed it in the courts. I'll say no more than that. There will be certain other things to come, which will no doubt become very apparent in the near future, and we intend to keep this Parliament very occupied on a follow-the-money package. But let me translate what this means for people. Let's strip all the fancy talk. The Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago, in their 2017 report, which is their latest report, said that in 1 year, in Trinidad and Tobago, 1 year, we had, listen to this, $22.1 billion of suspicious transaction activity. And they said that in the period 2011 to 2016, if you add up all the suspicious transactions, all the suspicious activities, and you add them up for those 5 full years, you get $4.5 billion. So in 5 years, 2011 to 2016, you have $4.5 billion in suspicious transactions, but in 1 year, suspicious transactions come up to $22.1 billion. Madam Speaker, first of all, we didn't get there by mistake. It's this Minister of Finance, this government, that beefed up the resources in the Financial Intelligence Unit. So they had the manpower to track this. It is this government that went to work on litigation to chase money. And let me make it even a finer point. It was only a few transactions, 9 transactions. 9 transactions alone, which were attempted transactions. Of that 22 billion, 9 transactions equaled $13 billion in suspicious activity, which was stopped because they were red flagged by the FIU. We come here today, we say to the country, thanks to the appointment by this government of an aggressive management of crime, the hard work put on by Point 14 being ably amplified and taken forward by the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West. The appointment by this side of the House alone, as the Honourable Minister of National Security points out, of a Commissioner of Police. Madam Speaker, permit me to press pause. The Honourable Prime Minister said something the other day that resonated in my mind as to how true and fundamentally simple the point was. Prior to Commissioner Griffith, every time there was a murder, every time there was crime, where the minister, where the prime minister, the government, the government, the government. Everybody opposite refused to support Gary Griffith as Commissioner of Police. But this is the first time in this country in a long time that people are saying there's crime. Commissioner is talking. Commissioner is taking the fight, because the Commissioner should be taking that fight. And Madam Speaker, when we come now to bring legislation like this to say to the police and the Financial Intelligence Unit, listen, we heard you in your report that you have $22 billion in 1 year alone. Let us equip you with the power to go and prosecute people for money laundering and proceeds of crime, because we are enabling the environment as a government. And how are we enabling it, Madam Speaker? Criminal Division Bill with specialist courts. Debottlenecking of our court environment by removing 110,000 cases per year that are clogging up the system with traffic matters. We are supplementing the judiciary by 77% in terms of their judicial numbers. We open new courts. We have more to come. We installed criminal proceedings rules. We have dealt with 152 maximum sentence hearings, another 162 coming ahead. The backlog is crunching, and now we're seeing in the creation of specialist courts for money laundering and fraud and white-collar crime in the face of $22 billion, we are saying, you know what? Let's give the police a fighting chance. Let's give the FIU a fighting chance. And my learned friends opposite say what today? Let's talk some more. Tomorrow.
Joint committee.
Right? 7 clauses in a bill. 1 subclause alone treats with the provisions for the TTPS and the FIU. The fact is, every FIU in the world has access to the taxpaying information. So if you want warranting or a high court order for a judge, well, say so. But you honestly mean to say, Madam Speaker, that we can't right here, right now, in this House, which is no substitute for a Joint Select Committee, where all members can speak, we must buy the argument of the UNC that we must talk some more? I think, Madam Speaker, to twist Shakespeare's words, thou doth protest too much, Madam Speaker. And I am deeply concerned in the face of a scourge of crime, where you have cracking resources for the first time ever as we are about to launch a public defender system, as we yesterday granted the DPP's office brand new facilities in Port of Spain. We opened the Tobago offices. We opened the San Fernando offices. We've beefed up the FIU. We are coming to abolish preliminary inquiries. I'm telling all my colleagues opposite, I'm telling them as loud as I'm saying it now, don't get comfortable, because we have hard work to do in this parliament, and we intend to achieve the mission that is on the table. So, Madam Speaker, I have heard nothing from my learned colleagues opposite. In 6 months since we laid this bill to a joint select committee, we laid it in 2017. I might hear the bumbling laughter of certain people, but Madam Speaker, it's 2017. We headed up to 2019, and my learned colleagues opposite can't submit one scrap of paper. I mean, Madam Speaker, I'm volunteering now. You want to dictate it, I'll write it down. I'll do the work. I don't mind. I will sit down and do the work for you, but you can't guess what's in your head. What is the issue? What will require us to take more time? In conclusion, the Global Forum deadline is real. To cure the incompetence of the UNC regime in 2010 to 2015 with respect to the Global Forum, because in 2010 we had the first peer review. To cure that incompetence, where we should have done 13 agreements with different countries, we're doing a fast-track approach with a multilateral convention. We cannot sign the multilateral convention unless we amend this law. We have to amend this law for FATF, for FATCA, and for Global Forum. And now, this cannot wait for the other two bills. The Global Forum has sat down with us, as the honourable members are aware, and they have been a team member effectively in drafting this legislation. This concerns foreign nationals in terms of the tax information exchange. And Madam Speaker, the UNC has a moral and legal obligation to exercise a sense of urgency and propriety in dealing with simple legislation. Madam Speaker, I look forward with a pen in my hand, paper under it, to write down what they cannot do for the last 6 months as I hear the contributions coming forward. This government is willing to listen to any amendment that makes sense. It cannot be based in inconsistency. Make your argument clearly and give us the prescription. This parliament requires that we circulate amendments. My learned friends opposite never circulate amendments in the general terms. We've had 1 or 2, but it's usually with a run-up to the wicket that involves months of bramble, months of time wasting, and the country cannot and will not accept that on this occasion. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Nampurima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to engage in the debate of this bill and to indicate that the UNC, from the onset, that the UNC is committed and will always support good legislation. We are mindful of our oath of office, and we will not sit here, despite the blustering from San Fernando West, despite the noise and the carré, as they say in the dialect. We will stand by our commitment to our oath and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But you see, Madam Speaker, listening to my colleague from San Fernando West, it is clear that he does not listen. He hears what he wants to hear and he runs off on a frolic. My colleague, and I want to congratulate my colleague from Chaguanas East, who so eloquently put forward the position of a patriotic UNC opposition. He never said, my colleague from Chaguanas East, never said that the anti-terrorism bill targeted Muslims. He never said that. But that is what San Fernando West heard. He said various Muslim groups expressed concerns with the bill. And that is a fact.
Trying to change the conversation.
Madam Speaker, I could turn to Sunday, June 10th, 2018 in the Trinidad Guardian. There was an article by Gail Alexander, headline, the AG being sued by the Mohammed family, with a subheading. The subheading was, a family claims they were terrorized. So to come here and pretend that there were not concerns by our fellow Muslim citizens about the anti-terrorism bill is to ignore reality and to have one head in the sand. They keep bringing up the question of FADCA. We supported FADCA, and I want to reiterate what my colleague from Chaguanas East said. And in fact, I could summarize it. We made it a better bill. We served the interests of Trinidad and Tobago. And he said when FATCA legislation was brought to Parliament, the opposition led by Mrs. Kamla Prasad-Bisesa indicated to the government that we were not prepared to support the legislation in the form in which it was brought. The legislation was sent to a joint select committee. The opposition worked tirelessly to guide the government in the right direction, and more than 100 amendments were made to FATCA legislation to ensure that it served the interests of Trinidad and Tobago. He would want us to believe, that they worked hard to get us off the list, and I'll deal frontally with that when I get into the substance of my submission. Madam Speaker, they come here and threaten, my colleagues opposite, come and threaten us that they're going to follow the money. They're going to follow the money, and somehow we should be scared when they come with this threat. And I ask them, if you're following the money, follow AV drilling $100 million. Follow the money, follow Galleon Passage. Follow the Astral Ferries. Follow the Ocean Flower. Follow the money. Follow the money. And don't boast about crime and all the wonderful, great things. They are hiding behind some assumption that crime has gone away. Madam Speaker, since the appointment of Porter Spain North, St. Anne's West, since he assumed the office of Minister of National Security, there has been 104 murders. Wow. 104 for citizens dead.
Madam Speaker, may I direct your attention to Standing Order 8, please?
I was just looking for
Honorable members, I'm happy that we could put a little light spirit into times when emotions get high. Member for Naparima, you please continue.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much for your understanding. But it is a standard practice of 10 or 15 frivolous interventions by the other side. Now, why are we here? What are we trying to achieve today in this legislation? And fundamentally, the PNM has lapsed. We are here because the PNM has lapsed with respect to getting us off the EU watch list. And they wait until the last minute. They did it with FATCA. They wait till the last minute. They bring legislation. They tell us like chicken licking, the heavens will fall if we do not pass this immediately, forthwith. And then try to hoodwink us to pass inadequate and a legislation that is not the best. So let us follow the timelines. They want us to believe that they're so urgent and they've been working hard, expeditiously, to get us off the watch list and to meet the FATF and the OECD and the EU requirements and those of the Global Forum. Let's follow the timeline. The Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018. The first reading was on the 25th of May, 2018, and it was referred immediately to the Joint Select Committee on the same date. A Joint Select Committee was established to consider and report on the 3 bills: the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018, the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018, and the Tax Information Exchange Bill 2018, and we were supposed to report by June 30th, 2018. The committee, which was chaired by Mr. Colm Imbert, the member for Diego Martin Northeast, held 3 meetings on the following dates. The first meeting, Wednesday, 6 June 2018, lasted only 15 minutes. The second meeting was scheduled for the 20th June 2018 and postponed until Tuesday, 21st August 2018. This meeting lasted for 1 hour. And the third meeting, the third and last meeting, was held on Wednesday, 29th August 2018 and lasted for 1 hour and 10 minutes. On June 29, 2018, the committee presented an interim report to the House and requested an extension to September 14, 2018, since only 1 10-minute meeting was held. So the question is, why did the chairman schedule only 3 meetings with a total of 2.5 hours to discuss 3 vitally important pieces of legislation? So, and that forces me to underscore the point, they are not serious about making Trinidad and Tobago compliant. When we get into the operations of the meeting, you will see further evidence that they're not serious. Now, page 6 of the Joint Select Committee draft report indicated that due to parliamentary recess and scheduling conflicts, meetings could not be held until August the 18th. However, during the first meeting of the Joint Select Committee, members agreed to a quorum of 3 persons, inclusive of the chair, with representation of at least 1 member from each house. So 3 members. So if we did not want to, because it was vacation, not to take up the time of all members, so we said we would allow 3 members. In July 2018, opposition members on the committee indicated to the Secretariat of the Joint Select Committee that we were willing to meet any time during the recess. I want to underscore that point. They are not serious. I indicated on July 28th, I personally, on July 26, 2018, that I would be available on any day except August 16 to 27. Senator Hussain indicated that he would also be available, as well as the MP for Chaguanas East. Therefore, a representative from each house would have been present at the beginning of August. MP myself, MP Karim, Chaguanas East, and Senator Hussain. Hence, it follows that the only setback in forming a quorum would have been the willingness and presence of the chairman for a meeting to occur. If the government was serious, we could have completed all 3 pieces of legislation during the vacation, and we could have brought all 3 to Parliament, and today we would be discussing the output of a serious parliamentary group and fulfilling our mandate to pass good legislation expeditiously. What are the questions arising from above? The letter indicating the timelines of the bills. At the 3rd meeting of the Joint Select Committee, the Minister of Finance circulated a letter he sent to the Code of Conduct Group dated 21st November 2017, and that was referred to by my colleague from Chaguanas East. The Code of Conduct Group is the EU group responsible for monitoring and reviewing tax measures of the EU member states and tax measures of foreign countries to ensure that their member states do not partake in harmful tax practices abroad. This letter by the Minister of Finance listed 5 pieces of legislation and the proposed timeline for their passage. So we went to the EU and we indicated to them that we will be passing 5 pieces of legislation. the income tax amendment bill on the 30th of June. We told them that.
What year?
We told them that in November 2017. We told them we will be passing the double taxation agreement bill in June 30th, 2018. June, we're now in November. We'll be passing the companies amendment bill June 30th, 2018. And the mutual administrative assistance in tax matters bill, November 30th. So at the end of this month, we should have passed the mutual administrative assistance in tax matters bill and the base erosion and profit sharing legislation by June 30th next year, 29. The double taxation agreements bill and the companies amendment bill have not even been laid in Parliament. Yet we wrote a serious body like the EU and told them we would have them passed by June 30th this year. Not serious. They write letters indicating and give commitments and then do not at all abide by them. One of these 5 pieces of legislation, the government has chosen to rush to completion the income tax amendment bill and claim that this will get us off the non-compliant list. And the question I asked the Minister of Finance, will the passage of this one piece of legislation satisfy the requirements for any of the criteria for becoming compliant with the EU and get us off the watch list? They are not serious. We could pass this legislation and still tomorrow realize that we are still on the EU blacklist. The Joint Select Committee was supposed to consider 3 bills. That was the remit that we got from the Parliament. That was the remit we got. Page 8 of the verbatim notes of the first meeting held on June 6th. The Minister of Finance said that we will do all 3 bills, not just one. But you see, the Minister of Finance is not serious. He was not serious with us in the committee. He's not serious with the EU, and I'll tell you why. I want to quote from the verbatim notes of the Joint Select Committee, the Income Tax Bill, the meeting held on the 6th of June 2018 on page 8. It says, and we asked him, why are we and what is the rationale for these 3 bills? And here his rationale, and I quote, to show that he's not serious. He said, I set a very short deadline, I'm quoting here, to show the EU and the global forum that we are serious. So we set a tight deadline to show we're serious. It is unlikely that we would meet the deadline for the end of June. I mean, we have this procedural thing to do, and so on. I figure we would not do it by the end of June, probably maybe even by September, October, but it doesn't matter. I want to get in and let them see that we're doing something. He mama guy in the EU. We just showing them and writing a letter and giving commitments, but by his own words, we were not serious. And I want to make this point because they like to, on the other side, like to give the impression that somehow we are not committed to passing good legislation. But how could we engage when on the opposite side they have indicated that they are not serious? At the second meeting of August 21st, the Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel indicated on page 14 of the verbatim notes, and the Minister of Finance acknowledged that both the income tax and mutual assistance in tax matters bill were the most important and needed to be passed in order to make us compliant with global forum. So, Madam Speaker, how is it that we went from 3 bills being necessary, with 2 being most important, and today we're down to 1? The sense of the logic and the movement makes it difficult to follow follow the money, follow the trail of logic. It is because the Minister of Finance said that we are only considering the income tax bill, since it was the smaller of the bills, and its passage would go a long way in dealing with the complaints of the global forum and the EU. So we're here today because we have been told, that it will go a long way I see your preoccupation with tall things. A long way in meeting the EU and Global Forum requirements. So it was the shortest and quickest bill to pass. As if they are doing something, because they see the thing. We're not serious. We're not a serious country. We write and give commitments. And we tell them we're doing things only to mama guide them. When in fact the chairman is not serious, since the JSC could have convened for longer hours and held more meetings, and we could have passed all 3 bills that the Joint Select Committee was supposed to consider. And I want to say today, we are prepared to work night and day, 24/7, to get this ready for the end of this month. And the challenge is on your side to get the necessary manpower and resources so that we could engage seriously in the interests of our people of Trinidad and Tobago and not come here crying crocodile tears about how serious we are and how serious they are, and the opposition is not supporting their initiatives. We are prepared to support. You know why, Madam Speaker? We are patriots on this side. Patriots, loyal to Trinidad and Tobago. We want Trinidad and Tobago to be better than Singapore. They don't like to hear that. What are the real requirements for Trinidad and Tobago to be removed from the non-compliant list? Because that is, they keep talking FATF, Global Forum, talking EU, CFATF, and fancy stuff. But fundamentally, we want to get off the watch list, the various blacklists. A press release dated December 5th, 2017, issued by the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, stated that, and I quote, "The EU has expressed that a jurisdiction will be removed from the list once it has addressed the issues of concern for the EU and has brought its tax system fully in line with the required good governance criteria. The government of Trinidad and Tobago," and I'm quoting from press release, "shares the goal of the EU with respect to fighting tax abuse and reassures that we will act with alacrity on this matter." Well, alacrity, Madam Speaker, means eagerness. It means expedition. It means zeal. It means swiftness. It means dispatch. It means speed. And what I have seen in the Joint Select Committee, slothfulness. And I'll talk a little bit more about how slothful we are with respect to meeting our international obligations. On May 25th, 2018, in giving a statement on the Global Forum and the European Union requirements, EU requirements, the Minister of Finance indicated, quote, "To become compliant with Global Forum, European Union and FATF requirements, Trinidad and Tobago is required to have in place the legislative framework that would allow for the exchange of information and administrative structures for that exchange. In this regard, he then said, 2 related bills were laid to address the many deficiencies, namely the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018 and the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018. He also indicated that the Global Forum requires us to have legislation to facilitate the exchange of tax information between Trinidad and Tobago and member states of the Global Forum, et al. Namely, the Tax Information Exchange Bill 2018, which was described as being at the bottom of the totem pole and not as important as the other 2 bills. That was given by the Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel, and it's listed on page 14 of the verbatim minutes. At this same May 25th meeting, the minister stated, "The Global Forum required Trinidad and Tobago to take the necessary steps to bring the country into compliance with the current standards and also to implement the new Global Forum standard by June 2017. However, this could not be done within the short time frame. Trinidad and Tobago is expected to undergo in June 2018 its 2nd peer review. In this regard, the required legislation should be in place by that time." So those are the commitments, those are the expectations. We underwent a 2nd peer review in 2018. Guess what, Madam Speaker? The OECD, in its October 18 overall ratings against the exchange of information on request standard, they call it the EOIR standard, said of Trinidad and Tobago, You see, you could fool us in this parliament. You could fool Trinidad and Tobago, but you cannot fool everybody every time, including the OECD. The OECD said of Trinidad and Tobago in 2018, this quote, and this is an indictment on the Minister of Finance, and an indictment on Trinidad and Tobago, a country which I'm proud to be a citizen. Hear what they said, and I quote, "This jurisdiction applied for the fast-track review, but the progress it demonstrated was not sufficient to justify an upgrade of its rating beyond non-compliant." End of quote. The EU is saying that we didn't do what we were supposed to do. And I'll get to the point where other countries did. Where the other countries did what they had to do to get off the list. I say it again. This government is not serious about making us compliant. And they can blame us for the past. They could blame us for the present. They will blame us for the future. But they cannot understand that they have to work and do what is necessary and that you cannot fool everybody all the time. So I would advise that they change the majority of their speeches, in which I'm sure they will go long on rhetoric on blaming the PP government, and explain to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that they have not brought all the pieces of legislation needed to make us compliant. The PNM does not give us the facts, Madam Speaker. And I hate to use this word, they're slothful. The Council of European Union on the 5th December 2017 stated, Trinidad and Tobago has been attributed a rating non-compliant by the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes, has not signed and ratified the OECD Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, as amended, the same legislation that should have been brought here today so that we could have become compliant. And they continue, has a harmful preferential tax regime. That's what they're saying about Trinidad. We have a harmful preferential tax regime and did not commit to addressing these issues by 31st December 2018. Madam Speaker, this is not Rodney Charles speaking. This is the Council of the European Union. So and that is why you see sometimes when they do not meet CARICOM and whatnot, it is because they do not take us seriously, because we're not serious. Make commitments that we're not serious about. I mean, you could come here and bluster and look nice and sound nice, and Trinidadian may buy it, but you can't do that to the Europeans or to the foreigners. The Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters is one of the legislation that this government has chosen to delay, and we do not have it here today. It gets worse. According to the brief on the state of play on international tax transparency standards, the state of play, that is a document, I have it, a brief on the state of play on international tax transparency standards 2017 by the OECD. Several jurisdictions, made sufficient changes towards meeting the exchange of information on request standard, which led to upgrades in the overall ratings of 17 jurisdictions. So in 2016, a lot of countries were not compliant, including Trinidad. All the other countries got upgrades. Guess which country did not get an upgrade? Trinidad and Tobago, the country that I'm proud to say I'm a citizen of this country. But sometimes they let me down. 3 jurisdictions moved from non-compliant to largely compliant. 3, and you should see some of these countries. St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Nauru. Nauru has 10,000 people. We have 1.3 million. 10 jurisdictions moved from partially compliant to largely compliant. 10. 1 jurisdiction moved from non-compliant to partially compliant. 3 jurisdictions were not rated and received a rating, which were not rated, received a rating of largely compliant. Today, and this is what the OECD said in 2017, on the 5th December 2017. They said today, only one jurisdiction, Trinidad and Tobago, has a non-compliant rating against the exchange of information request rating. That is where we are. That is where we are. And this was sent to me by one of my colleagues at the OECD. He wanted us to raise this in Parliament because he knew Trinidad is better than this. We are better than what is being presented. And I tell you, when I look at 3 bits of legislation we are supposed to discuss, we committed, and today we commit. Today, we commit to meet 24/7 to discuss the 3 bits of legislation, and we will support it once realistic amendments are made consistent with the best interests of Trinidad and Tobago. What this means is that this PNM government did nothing upon taking office. Nothing. Absolute. St. Kitts did. St. Lucia did. Barbados did. We did nothing. All the OECD and EU required from our country was a letter from a high-level political institution or person indicating that we were prepared to commit to do certain things. Our CARICOM neighbors, St. Lucia, Grenada, Barbados have been removed, but Trinidad and Tobago remains. They committed to changes, and they were moved from the blacklist to a gray list of jurisdictions with low tax transparency standards, but aiming to become less opaque.
410, please.
Member, I just want us all to remember that the budget is over, and we're in a debate. Yeah. But, you know, I know you could rely a little less on your notes, so you continue.
So we have rushed with one piece of legislation. We have rushed with one bill when we should have been considering 3. Now, it's a bit technical, and that is why I don't want to mislead the House. So I have to be careful in certain specific areas I need to quote. There are 3 areas that we are supposed to deal with. Tax, transparency, and I want to make the point that this piece of legislation does not deal with tax transparency. And it means that the jurisdiction has committed to and started the legislative process to implement the common reporting standard. Right? The common reporting standard. Has agreements for or has already signed the multilateral competent authority agreement and possesses at least a largely compliant rating with the OECD. That's 1.1. Under tax transparency. On 1.2, under tax transparency, the jurisdiction possesses at least a largely compliant rating with the OECD. We're not there. This legislation will not get us there. At 1.3, the jurisdiction should have either ratified or be in the process of ratifying the Multilateral Convention on the Mutual Administrative Assistance. Today, it is not even here. So the question of ratification is far in the future. So that is one criterion we're supposed to deal with. And this legislation today does not deal with tax transparency.
Honourable Member for Naparima, your original 30 minutes are now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes. Would now be a convenient time, or do you want to go for the other 2 minutes? Okay, so may I suggest that we take the suspension now? We will resume at 5 p.m.